An undefeated assassin, betrayed and killed by his own master for being too dangerous. But death was not the end for him. He was reborn as the son of the strongest family on the continent. With a second chance and memories of his past life, he swears to take revenge on those who betrayed him. Will he succeed in fulfilling his vengeance in this new world? Without further ado, let's dive into the story. Under the full moon, its light barely piercing through the thick clouds. Ryan, a genius assassin from the shadowy organization Shadow, had dedicated his entire life to killing. But one day, he heard a chilling whisper: his death would come at the hands of his own master, Deus Robert. Returning from a mission, Ryan reported his success to Robert. He was praised for his outstanding contributions to strengthening the family. Yet, in the middle of the conversation, Ryan suddenly realized something. The indoctrination binding him had vanished. Indoctrination was a technique the Robert family used to control assassins from childhood. But Robert already knew. Shocked, Ryan asked how his master had discovered this. With a cold smile, Robert revealed a horrifying truth. Aside from indoctrination, he had also implanted a rage worm inside Ryan's body. This creature didn't just ensure complete obedience, it could also devour its host's heart if they ever dared to resist. Worse still, it could read emotions. With a snap of his fingers, Robert activated the rage worm. Instantly, Ryan was overwhelmed by unbearable agony as his heart was consumed from within. After years of being shackled, he had finally felt a glimmer of hope thanks to the Ring of Fire technique, which had freed him from Robert's control. But in an instant, that hope was shattered. Knowing his end was near, Ryan made a desperate attack against Robert, but failed. In a single swift motion, his head was severed. As his consciousness faded, Ryan screamed in his heart, begging any god or devil to grant him another chance for revenge. Then, the impossible happened. Instead of perishing, Ryan found himself reborn in the body of a young boy with golden hair. Even more shocking, his name was still Ryan. At first, he thought it was just a dream. But as time passed, he began to accept the truth. He had been reborn into a wealthy family. Yet, unlike in his previous life, Ryan wanted to learn more about his family. Unfortunately, as a mere baby, his actions were still severely limited. One day, while spending time with his mother, a servant suddenly rushed in, his face pale with panic. With a trembling voice, he announced that the lady's father was arriving at the mansion. Sylvie, Ryan's mother, gasped. She quickly ordered the servants to prepare, but it was already too late. The man had already arrived, standing at the entrance with an air of undeniable authority. At that moment, Ryan froze. His grandfather was none other than the ruler of the continent's strongest family, the destructive king of the north, Glenn Sieghart. In that instant, Ryan realized the truth. He had been reborn into the mightiest family on the continent. Trying to ease the tension, Sylvie offered her father to hold his grandson. Expressionless, Glenn accepted, lifting Ryan into his arms. With a calm voice, he said, "The name Ryan carries meaning. Live in silence, without causing a stir, like a shadow." Night fell. Unable to sleep, Ryan made up his mind. He would train in the Ring of Fire. To him, revenge against Deus Robert was no longer just a dream, it was his destiny. But as he began his training, he noticed something strange. The mana circuit in his body felt icy cold. At first, he considered breaking through the frost using the Ring of Fire. However, another thought crept into his mind. Wouldn't it be a waste to get rid of such powerful cold energy? A sudden idea struck him. What if he combined the flow of fire with the chilling energy within his body? Carefully, he attempted to merge both forces, rotating them in harmony. Slowly, he gained better control over his mana circuit. However, his infant body couldn't withstand the strain. Exhausted, he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, while playing with his mother, a stranger arrived at the mansion. Ryan recognized him immediately. He was the rugged saint, the greatest healer on the continent. The saint had come to examine Ryan's condition. However, once the diagnosis was complete, his expression darkened. With a heavy voice, he declared that Ryan was afflicted with a deadly curse of frost. This curse sealed his mana circuit with blocks of ice, hindering the flow of energy and greatly diminishing his chances of ever becoming a swordsman. Even worse, it also shortened his lifespan. If left untreated, Ryan would die young. Sylvie's face turned pale. Then, unable to hold back her emotions, tears streamed down her cheeks. With a shaking voice, she cried out, "I'll do anything. Please, save my child." Throughout his previous life, Ryan had never experienced a mother's love, but seeing her cry like that, his chest tightened. Without hesitation, Sylvie rushed to her father, who was still speaking with the saint. Desperately, she dropped to her knees before him. "Father, please, save Ryan." Yet Glenn remained unmoved. His face was cold, devoid of emotion. In a chilling voice, he replied, "It's useless. I will not help you." The only thing he could offer Ryan was the Sieghart name. With that, Glenn dismissed Sylvie without hesitation. To him, there was nothing more to discuss. The saint who witnessed the event asked why Glenn didn't tell his daughter her the truth, even though he was the one who ordered him to come and examine Rayon's condition. Glenn remained silent for a moment, then changed the subject by asking the saint to explain Rayon's condition to him. The saint explained that 9 of Rayon's mana circuits were blocked by a curse, and it would become more dangerous as he aged. He also added that it was nearly impossible for Raon to become a swordsman in the future. Hearing this, Glenn remained calm and stated that it was not an issue, as long as Raon could survive. 2 years passed. Thanks to his regular training and the elixirs provided by the saint for treatment, Raon finally reached the first stage of Ring of Fire. Time flew by. Raon was now 5 years old and had formed his second Ring of Fire. However, despite reaching this stage, the curse of frost and poor stamina still remained. Even so, Raon did not want to rush. He felt that he still had plenty of time to grow and continued his cultivation. Raon initially wanted to train again but had to stop when his mother entered the room, reminding him to get ready. Today was the day they had to go to the Sieghart family's main hall. Upon arrival, Raon and his mother immediately drew attention due to the bad rumors surrounding them. However, they ignored the whispers and continued forward. Not long after, the head of the family, Glenn Sieghart, entered the room. Without saying much, he immediately drew his massive sword of judgment to begin the judgment ceremony. The purpose of this ceremony was to gather children from different family branches and measure their mana potential. The first child called was Buren Sieghart, who possessed the wind attribute. Next was Runan Solion, who had the ice attribute. Finally, the last name called was Raon Sieghart. As he stepped forward, Raon immediately received contemptuous gazes from those around him. He had no high expectations because his body was still affected by the curse. When Raon placed his hand on the giant sword, he suddenly saw a flash of memories stored within it. In that vision, a blonde swordsman was seen battling numerous monsters. Shocked, Raon quickly regained his senses and saw that his mana attribute was incredibly small, not even reaching the halfway point. The people watching sneered and looked at him with mockery. Shortly after, Glenn ended the ceremony and ordered the attendees to leave. Even though Glenn had expected this outcome, he still felt disappointed by Raon's result. However, after the attendees had left the room, Raon's residual mana in the Sword of Judgment suddenly began to expand. The sword then radiated a golden light resembling the sun, a phenomenon known as the golden flame. This phenomenon was extremely rare. In the entire history of the Sieghart family, the golden flame had only appeared once before. 7 years passed since the judgment ceremony. Now, Raon was close to reaching the third stage of Ring of Fire and had turned 12 years old. That day, he returned to the main estate to attend the closing ceremony of the judgment ceremony. During the closing event, Glenn suddenly reminded Raon that he would be participating in basic training as a new member of the family. Hearing this, Raon looked confused. He was only being told now, while everyone else had known about it a month ago. When the announcement was made, Raon's mother suddenly opposed the decision, arguing that Raon was not yet fit to undergo basic training due to the frost curse in his body. Glenn, upon hearing this, seemed displeased and firmly stated that there were no exceptions or rejections for those who had received the Sieghart name. Despite Sylvie's desperate pleas for more time, she realized that her efforts were futile now that Raon had inherited the family name. The onlookers sneered and mocked her with disdainful gazes. Seeing his mother being humiliated, Raon could not remain silent. He stepped forward and accepted Glenn's command to participate in Sieghart's basic training. Observing his grandson's determination, Glenn decided to test him by exerting the pressure of someone who held the title Destructive King of the North. Raon refused to back down and endured the crushing force to prove he was worthy of the Sieghart name, though in the end, he lost consciousness due to the overwhelming pressure. The next day, after the ceremony, Raon immediately resumed training in preparation for the upcoming training camp. Meanwhile, at the 5th training ground of the Sieghart family, Glenn visited a red-haired man known as Sword of Light, Rimmer Diaz. Rimmer assumed that Glenn had come to ask him to go easy on Raon, just like Sylvie had previously requested. However, he was mistaken. Instead, Glenn ordered Rimmer not only to maintain the intensity of the training but to increase it if necessary. Hearing Glenn's command, Rimmer became even more intrigued by Raon, despite how weak the boy was. On the other hand, Raon continued his preparations and finally reached the third stage of Ring of Fire through consistent training. But this was merely the beginning. The training within the Sieghart family was notoriously difficult, and achieving the third stage of Ring of Fire was only the foundation. The night before the training camp began, Sylvie visited Raon's room. She wanted to talk to him, trying to persuade him to delay the training for a year out of concern for his well-being. However, Raon remained resolute in his decision. He wanted to prove himself to those who belittled both him and his mother. Seeing her son's unwavering determination, Sylvie finally decided to reveal the reason they lived alone and why they were despised by many. It all started when Sylvie fell in love and deliberately destroyed her mana circuit so she could leave the Sieghart family. However, her happiness did not last long. A member of Eden recognized her face and launched a sudden attack on them. Raon's father, who was not particularly strong, and Sylvie, who was pregnant at the time, were unable to resist. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was too late. Raon's father had been killed in the assault. With nowhere else to go, Sylvie was forced to return to the Sieghart family. That was why she was hated by so many. Upon hearing his mother's story, Raon felt that what she did was selfish, abandoning her duty to the family for the sake of personal happiness. But at the same time, she was also the one who gave him this new life and showered him with love. No matter how others labeled her as selfish, to Raon, Sylvie Sylvie was still his one and only mother in this second life. Round reassured Sylvie that he would be fine. After their conversation, he resumed training Ring of Fire, hoping to reach the intermediate stage. However, in the midst of his training, a sudden blue flame erupted before him, taking the form of a spirit. The being introduced itself as Wrath Spirit. The spirit demanded that Round surrender his soul and body as an offering to exact revenge. Initially, Wrath Spirit seemed surprised that the one before him was merely a child. However, after peering deeper into Round's heart, he realized that within this boy lay an unfathomable rage. Round refused the spirit's offer, but Wrath Spirit was relentless. It attempted to provoke Round's anger, forcing him to succumb. Fortunately, Round managed to resist the temptation using Ring of Fire, the very technique he had trained so diligently. Not only did he withstand the spirit's influence, but to his surprise, he also gained a new ability, an authority belonging to Wrath Spirit called Status Window. It turned out that the system that had always appeared before Round was actually created by the spirit itself. When Round asked for further explanation, the spirit refused, claiming it had no reason to tell him more. Annoyed by the spirit's attitude, Round told it to leave. However, instead of disappearing, the Wrath Spirit transformed into a bracelet that could appear at any time. The next day, at Sieghart's fifth training ground, a large crowd gathered for the Sieghart family's training selection. It wasn't just the main family's descendants but also children from collateral families, recommended candidates, and those from subordinate families. As expected, as soon as Round arrived, many people started whispering about him. Hearing their gossip, Round directly confronted them, challenging them to say it to his face. Feeling provoked, some of the kids grabbed Rion's clothes as if trying to start a fight. However, before things escalated, Buren Sieghart stepped in and stopped them. But rather than helping, Buren only added fuel to the fire by provoking Round further. Round tried to remain calm, but in the end, he responded to Buren's provocation. Just as a fight was about to break out, Rimmer suddenly appeared and put an end to it. The training event officially began. Rimmer explained that out of the 160 participants, so only a quarter would advance to the next stage. This announcement shocked many of the children, as it meant the majority of them would be eliminated. Ignoring their protests, Rimmer immediately ordered everyone to start running. The children took off, with Buren and Runan leading the pack. Meanwhile, Round lagged behind at the very back. Seeing this, many began to mock Round, convinced he wouldn't be able to compete. However, to Rimmer, Round was actually quite fascinating. He had the ability to see a person's potential through the color of their aura, yet strangely, he couldn't see any color from Round, as if his potential was beyond comprehension. Meanwhile, Round continued running tirelessly. To him, this kind of training was far too easy compared to what he had endured in his previous life. Round's persistence started to confuse many onlookers, even Rimmer himself, who was surprised that Round hadn't run out of stamina yet. Buren, observing Round still running, decided to use his aura to increase his speed. However, Round merely glanced at him with a blank expression, considering his actions childish. To him, they shouldn't be competing against each other, as the essence of this training was self-development, not just a race. Despite his growing fatigue, Round kept running. Thanks to the progression of his Ring of Fire, he could replenish his stamina. The Wrath Spirit, noticing Round's exhaustion, attempted to take over his body. Round fought hard against the intrusion until, just before he was about to faint, the running selection concluded. Though it was extremely tough, his efforts paid off with an increase in his stats. Earlier, Rimmer had stated that children failing this test would be eliminated. However, it turned out to be a lie to test their perseverance. Nonetheless, Rimmer expected them to train earnestly. If not, he would genuinely eliminate those who slacked off. After providing this explanation, Rimmer immediately went to see Glenn to report on the training's progress. At the Sieghart training grounds, 3 children from collateral lines seemed displeased with Round's success. One of them was Crane Sieghart. They accused Round of using elixirs to boost his stamina and planned to teach him a lesson. Without any clear reason, they started bullying Rayon. However, an annoyed Rayon fought back until they were battered and unable to retaliate. At that moment, Rayon asked them who had provoked them. Initially, he suspected Buren, but it turned out he had nothing to do with the incident. After uncovering the truth, Round threatened the 3 children not to bother him again. Unbeknownst to them, Rimmer had been observing the incident from behind a tree. He was ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous, but what transpired surprised him. Rayon reminded him of a young Glenn. Back at the dormitory, Round conversed with the Wrath Spirit and made a bet. If Round won, he would gain a +2 increase in stats and 1 random trait. However, if he lost, he would receive 10 rage points, making him more susceptible to being overtaken by the Wrath Spirit. Without hesitation, Rayon accepted the bet, confident in his experience from his previous life. The next day, in the afternoon after training, many children complained about the rigorous exercises. Rayon, seeing them, remained indifferent and continued focusing on strengthening his body. Meanwhile, Runan was hiding behind a wall, secretly watching Rayon as he trained. The video ends here. But the story isn't over yet.